second woman who reaches for the baby seems impossible to grasp
Yeah. We're
adequately
in.
in writing. No individual writer writing with persistence towards the unsayable
Time
can
is
do justice to it.
non-existent.
And in fact, the essay is filled with images of people working patiently to compose what is by definition disordered, even unspeakable. These images eventually lead Rosemary in the essay to the insight that collective work, perhaps in a medium other than language, may provide a breakthrough for the writer. And then in this essay, music offers that other language. Rosemary describes how 13th century motets seem to leap away from 12th century polyphony so as to retain its diversity, yet provide unity. So that however much the different voices move and oppose each other, a short rhythmical unit of plain chant, constantly repeated, holds the voices together. That last part was a quotation. What a hopeful idea that the work that seems impossible when we are by ourselves or gathering in our town halls can draw on others' work, other languages, to move us a little closer towards writing the tough unsayable. The last species of Rosemary's writing that I want to mention today is writing to discover the continuity of life. Rosemary wrote, as you've heard, to transform the ordinary into the transcendent, as myth and spiritual practice do. And because the ordinary is the starting point, we can all see, hear, and touch, it is also a point of connection between us. The essay Rainworm illustrates Rosemary's practice of setting the lowliest of creatures into a cosmos that generates and circulates what is needed for life to flourish. She first sees the rainworm from her kitchen window after a rainy night, but soon the rainworm is humanized and domesticated, given a larger temporal and spatial scope than we might have expected earlier when he was a simple worm framed by the window. Now we see him, quote, giving up wife, prosperity, and companions for intellectual venturing. For he wants to acquire knowledge and experience, as we all do. With the help of my 9th grade earth science textbook, perhaps, Rosemary next provides a history for the rainworm using the lexicon of equatorial winds and weather systems. I think these were subjects that actually didn't really come naturally to her, equatorial winds and weather systems, which is why I brought in the earth science textbook. She's writing a myth infused with science and drawing on Plato. Finally, the rainworm drops out of a cumulus cloud. What I love about this essay is Rosemary's joyful vision of the universe. Rain, wind, light, and darkness together set in motion an orderly cosmos in which even the rainworm plays an essential role. Here is how the essay sums up the whole course of the rainworm's life. At midnight, in a clap of thunder, he was carried to his birth like a shooting star, to the morning and his creation by the sun in the spinning warmth of the equator. He has come both from under the earth and from heaven, and I see he is already living strenuously. So sometime, when the days allotted his present life are numbered, on a day saturated with rain, when the earth, like a giant plant, is distended with water, all its pores open, he will transpire back into the skies of those who love wisdom. I love to think of the earth saturated with water and of a soul choosing transpiration to leave the earth and find her place in a celestial realm governed by wisdom. Keep that wisdom coming our way, Rosemary.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm John Deen, Rosemary's youngest son. I don't actually have prepared remarks, so I won't be nearly as eloquent as everybody who's come before me, but I'll do my best. I want to talk a little bit about our family and what it was like. Growing up with Rosemary and Leonard as parents. they were both incredibly generous persons. People. It sounds like a cliche, but they really sacrificed everything for us, I think. My father never bought clothes for himself. At a certain point in our lives, he took hand-me-downs from me as I bought new clothes, and he would take my shirts. Yes, and they saved money in every way they possibly could, including mixing powdered milk with regular milk, half powdered milk with water and regular milk. And all these sacrifices, I think, I don't think we ever quite understood why we were always reminded never to waste anything, and they always, just did everything sort of what we saw as the hard way. But then, in 1969, they were able to buy this house in upstate New York, which completely transformed our lives in many ways. For one thing, I see four Finns sitting in the audience, and they live right down the road. They were great friends of their parents were great friends of Rosemary and Leonard. So we walked into this life in upstate New York, which was just paradise for us, walking everywhere we could, running in the woods, doing anything we wanted, going to the beach every day, and swimming and learning to swim, and just, the natural world. And of course, the gardens, as everyone's mentioned. I don't remember being put to work in the garden very much, interestingly. I don't know if it's that we were to be allowed to run free, or if we were just not to be trusted to work in the garden in the proper way, which brings to mind another story of when later in life, when she wasn't as capable of gardening, and a bunch of us came to help plant some gardens in areas that she could see from the house. And my children were somewhat baffled by some of her instructions because they weren't digging the hole in the right place. So she said, "No, you have to dig 3 feet to the east." And they looked at me like, "Which way is east? Like, why didn't she just say to the left or to the right?" But she was always oriented to the 4 directions and oriented towards the earth, as people thought. So, and she persisted despite their bafflement. I suppose it was a form of education in saying, no, 4 feet to the north. You have to go 4 feet to the north, almost as if they were treasure hunting and they had a map of the exact location. But she delighted, I think, in putting us all to work, although some of her anxiety that we weren't doing it right came through in her very precise instructions, which could happen in other areas of the world. I remember hearing a story about Louis, who's been a chef for her son-in-law, who's been a chef for many, many, many years, working in her kitchen, and her trying to explain to him how to chop garlic or how to chop an onion, or if he wasn't doing it quite right. And she exclaimed to me once, like, "Do you really find using a salad spinner is helpful?" I was like, "Yeah, first I use the salad spinner, and then I dry it with a towel." She's like, "Huh, I never found that helpful." So there was always a better way of doing things and a proper way of doing things, that she would always tell you about, no matter what. But she loved her grandchildren, and she enjoyed talking to them. And I think she was really interested in other people. Somebody said today, her friend Claudine said, that she was always interested in you and what you were doing and what you were talking about, and she was never talked about herself. And that, of course, was the cardinal sin. If she told you that somebody did nothing but talk about themselves, they were the worst kind of person that you could possibly imagine, because you should always talk about what interested you and what you're interested in, and that would engage people, and of course be more interesting. But she was very interested in what you were doing, and as other people have said, you had to be on your toes. We often talked about people sitting in the hot seat when we were at a family gathering, because you could see somebody sitting in the seat, and you could watch, like, especially if it was your child, like, are they doing okay? Is it going to be all right? Like, and then afterwards you can have a debrief. Was it okay? How was the hot seat? Was it? No, I had a strategy. It was okay. I was able to, people would, of course, you would talk about what you were doing, what you're interested in, but sometimes you felt like that maybe wasn't quite enough. So you had to have some approach, some strategy that could sort of rise to the occasion. We're talking with Rosemary, which could be fascinating, but also quite challenging. The other wonderful thing I think they did for us was to, again, through all their savings, we were able to take a trip to Europe for 4 months when our parents were on sabbatical, which was, again, I think truly transformative for us. I think it made us a little bit closer. We'd spent a lot of time in a VW microbus driving around Europe and staying in some quite questionable hotels. Yes. but it was wonderful. We were exposed to a world of art and culture that, we were constantly exposed to at the dinner table. But but to see it in the real world, in the real life, was really remarkable. And I think I know it changed my life forever in terms of what my interests were, where I went to work, what my job has been, in so many ways, along with everything else that everyone's mentioned. Nature. I can't go in woods and hear a wood thrush without thinking of Rosemary and Leonard. I sent her countless videos, a minute long, of wood thrush singing in the woods and she loved them. She would replay them, and she really appreciated that. And her love of gardens, and we would often go to a garden and just sort of, thank God for technology, we would FaceTime her live and just sort of walk around, and she'd say, "What's that?" And we would have, swing the phone back and forth. Sometimes I was sure I was making her dizzy. But just so she could see something and comment on it and talk about it. And she knew she could identify all the plants, almost instantly on site. She was better than any app for many of those things. You can't look up at the night sky without seeing the constellations that she tells about. All of those things, I think, will stay with us forever. And that was because she was interested in the world, and she didn't talk about herself, but she talked about what she was interested in. Which was, of course, her way of talking about herself and her mind, and what she was thinking of and what she was passionate about, which was the best way to do it. So all follow that example. Don't talk about yourselves. Rosemary would be very upset. There's more to say, but I'll leave room.
On a fall afternoon, much like today, about 55 years ago, I was in the Queens College English department mailroom after a department meeting, along with a number of other faculty members, chatting and collecting our mail.
Nice.
I had been teaching at Queens in the School of General Studies evening session for about 2 years and still didn't know many of my colleagues. But I was in conversation with someone, don't remember who now, about how much I liked going to the country, meaning upstate New York, but that the hotel we had discovered, the Mohonk Mountain House, after seeing its advertisement in the New Yorker, the sketch of the famous gazebos, was expensive and required that you eat 3 meals a day in the dining room. A nearby voice said, "I know a place in the country where you don't have to eat 3 meals a day." "Where's that?" I inquired. "My house," said the voice. After we had introduced ourselves more completely, and I understood that Rosemary was inviting us for a weekend visit, I demurred. "But I have 2 young children. Nadine was 6 and Amy was 2. "I have 5 children," she said firmly. Soon after, we were riding down Route 213, looking for a blue house, and passed it twice before we saw Mary Stella out in the road, waving us down. We were frequent happy guests after that, and in the many years to follow, we rented the little stone house next door, then expanded to the Dean's cottage across the road, and finally bought a small house of our own in Olive Bridge, down the road a short distance. The country became a large part of our lives on weekends and in summers. Our children blended in with the Deen children and those of neighborhood families. Barbara was their swim coach at the Marbletown Beach, and on other larks, Matthew and John were the admired big brothers, Stella our babysitter, Catherine the almost grown-up. Meanwhile, Rosemary, Leonard, Marie Ponceau, and I spent afternoons reading our morning's writings to each other. We all anticipated the jolly supper time outside at the picnic table. Indiana succotash. No dish but that brought from Leonard's childhood was so perfect. I still buy cranberry beans every fall to recreate it. The way Rosemary reached out and took us into her world must be familiar to all of you. It was characteristic of her to make you part of her world, to recognize you and to appreciate your individual qualities. We often say Rosemary and Leonard taught us how to live, and Nadine and Amy say softly that they had a privileged childhood. In addition to country memories, Rosemary and I shared a lifetime It's double-sided business. Shared a lifetime of work at Queens College, teaching in the English department. We started in the evening session, and those late nights were memorable. Classes started at 6:20 and ended at 10:50. Many of them required composition classes that gave Rosemary and Marie the canvas on which to experiment with the ideas that found publication and won praise and beaten at the poor desk. Rosemary and I arranged our programs so that we taught on the same 2 nights each week and could go home together. Bayside was conveniently on the way to Great Neck. Leonard taught in the day session, so my driving Rosemary home saved him a late night trip back to Flushing to pick her up. Our little evening sub-department was colonized by the day session chairman, who appointed a supervisor to do the scheduling and manage the required observations of faculty. As economic conditions in the city of New York worsened in the early 70s, he thought to get more work out of the 5 unionless women doing what was regarded as some of the most unrewarding teaching in the department. Suddenly, the lecturers were to be given an increase in course load to 4 courses each term instead of 3 like other faculty. As I was the only one with a completed PhD, we got the idea that we should have an election for our own evening chair, and I should run for the job. I never knew how much electioneering Rosemary did, but I suspect her influence was crucial. I won the election, and our daytime colleagues were only too glad to hand over the paperwork. That opened the opportunity to do more with the evening session. We added courses such as the first course on women writers, managed without extra budget by inviting 14 day session colleagues to each give 1 lecture on a woman writer of special interest to them. One of the best was Donald Stone, who told me that the opportunity to give that lecture started him on his book about Elizabeth Gaskell. Rosemary and I did our plotting on those late night trips from Flushing to Bayside, when we also talked over the evening's teaching, shared our successes and our failures, and worked up an appetite. We often found a perfect midnight snack in the Deen kitchen, sauteed yellow squash left over in an iron skillet, just waiting for us. One year, maybe it was 1975, Leonard had a sabbatical, and the whole family went to Europe. I thought it was for the year, but apparently it was only a semester. I was in charge of minding the country house, a responsibility I took quite seriously. All went well until just before their return, when I decided I had to clean up. Ultimately, I got to the refrigerator. Alas, in my scrupulousness, I tossed out the mother of vinegar, which Rosemary had been carefully saving, although it looked like something you wouldn't want in your refrigerator. My ignorance was generously forgiven, and as usual, I learned something. I'm sure Rosemary has taught all of us unforgettable lessons with grace and generosity. Nadine still says, italics, Italian, remembering an old correction. They used to say italics. When we were young, Rosemary taught us how to live as much as possible in the country with beloved friends and family, doing our work, sharing literature and music and good food, valuing each other, learning from each other, and teaching whenever we can. In old age, she continued to teach and model how to live until we die. Enduring physical limits, valuing privacy, she remained herself to the last. If, like me, you find a world without Rosemary sadly diminished, let me remind you that she left us a gift in her collection of essays, Naming the Light. You can still hear her voice there in a volume that belongs on the same shelf with Thoreau's A Week by the Concord and Merrimack Rivers and Sarah Orne Jewett's The Country of the Pointed Firs. All treasures which restore and inspire. Reading Rosemary's essays, you will find yourself transported to the country in the best of company.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Aubrey. Jim Hoover and I are longtime neighbors of Rosemary's. We first heard of the Deens before we met them. Our neighbor, Arthur Williams, kept saying, "You ought to meet the Deens," but our schedules didn't seem to coincide for the first year or so we had the house on Atwood Road. And it wasn't until some temporary neighbors in the little stone house had a birthday party that we actually met Leonard and Rosemary. We hit it off, and Jim issued an invitation to what Rosemary often laughingly referred to as a simple lunch. And in return, we were invited to dinner and asked to bring sharp knives. A rather puzzling invitation, but we complied. It was the first of many dinners around that dining table. Indiana succotash, of course. It was through Rosemary and Leonard and around that dining table that we met many of the people in this room. We came to feel that we had become part of an extended family. It was like a single conversation that extended over more than 35 years and included art, music, gardens, politics, literature, and of course, poetry. Sorry. Rosemary, as we mentioned before, was such an intense questioner and listener. I'm sure she made many of us feel like we were more interesting than we are. I had the privilege of being part of the library poetry group for a number of years. And her encouragement to observe rather than just evaluate has had a deep impact, not just on the way I read poetry, but on my approach to many aspects of life and art. I often think of her generosity as she prefaced remarks with, "As I'm sure you remember," before citing something from her photographic memory. Rosemary Deen was truly one of a kind, and we miss her terribly.
My name is Margaret Shirk, and I was one of Rosemary's students and a longtime friend. A little more than 50 years ago, I found a community in the English department at Queens College, teachers who were friends with each other and invited students into those relationships. Friendships that were formed talking about reading and writing, poetry and literature, social connections springing out of a world of ideas and imagination where our outer and inner worlds communicate, a literary community. Among teachers and fellow students, I felt my life transforming, enlarging. Having always heard the refrain, the cliche from teachers about not living up to my potential, I felt potential acting in me as I read and wrote and saw it on the page before me. These teachers, Rosemary and Leonard Deen, Marie Ponceau, and Betty Weidman, shared a fundamental idea about teaching, that students should learn from success, not error, from what they do right, not what they do wrong. And they were all sharing and practicing and experimenting with ways to create conditions for work in the classroom that facilitate positive, repeatable experiences. As you know, this idea became Rosemary and Marie's book, Beat Not the Poor Desk. Now, more than 50 years since my participation as a subject in this experiment, the potential of these ideas continues to act in me. And my friendship with Rosemary and Leonard continued too. 27 years ago this month, I spoke to you about being a student in Leonard's classes, read examples of his responses to my work, and expressed the difference that made in my life then. Rosemary's skill as a teacher was to make all her classes literary communities, and in those I had the pleasure and good fortune of being part, there were always others who recognized the transformation of the social space we shared, a new dynamic between us. Gatherings of friends, parties she hosted, feted language and connection too. Invitations read, bring a poem to share. Thinking about these experiences and Rosemary's friendship, I see now how fundamental making observations is to establishing a literary community or a classroom where everyone can speak and contribute free from the competition, opinions, and inferences often generate. Becoming aware of the distinction between observations, inferences, and opinions makes a crucial difference, not just in reading literature or poetry or working together in a writing class, but in a life of decisions, choices, ideas, and action. Observations serve to connect us. They can be shared, and they are at the foundation of knowledge about both what is observed and about the observer. Observations are the ground from which ideas spring. Rosemary taught us this. Rosemary, teacher and gardener, knew the importance of fertile soil and spent her long life cultivating it and cultivating us. As my sister said to me, you won't ever lose the benefits of the good life lessons learned from Rosemary.
My name's Rebecca. Rosemary was my godmother, and I had a very special connection with her, I think. One of the things that she did for me, I struggled with depression for a large portion of my life. And I spent a lot of that time when I was recovering from depressions in the country. And I would visit Rosemary during that time. She wouldn't talk to me about my depression. She wouldn't ask me how I was. She expected me to engage with her and in life the way she expected everybody else to. She would grill me. She would ask me questions. She would ask me to do things. And that allowed me to be part of other people's lives, even while I was depressed, even when my temptation was to withdraw. And that was really important. Not many people are able to put somebody else's depression aside and just treat them like a person in the way that she did. And that really, it was a real gift during that time. During that time, she had a birthday. I made a needlepoint for her. I don't know whether you're familiar with it. It was a tomato with a yellow background and framed in yellow. And it was something that I think she really liked it. She hung it up in her kitchen, but it meant something to me to be able to give her something. Then I'm just going to tell one other anecdote, which I told earlier, which is also very, very Rosemary. My mom and I were in the country, and it was in the evening, kind of nighttime, and one of us walked into the bathroom and there was a big snake. We did not know what to do. We closed the door and we called Rosemary. Rosemary came and she got the snake out of the house for us. So that was also very much like, what do we do? Oh, Rosemary will know. Anything to do with nature and life and pounding drums, she'll figure it out. So thank you. And she'll be missed. And remembered.
My name is Dan Finn, and my family had a house down the road from the Deens growing up in the country. And so Rosemary was an integral part of my life, particularly during the summers. I'm not going to be able to speak as eloquently as her children or relatives. And I want to say that the eloquence and interest that Rosemary had was so admirably expressed by you guys here. It was very touching and really brought her to mind. So I wanted to say that. And also to say, I know what that hot seat felt like a little bit. But and also she had so much knowledge, and I was, maybe this tall and couldn't absorb quite as much of it as was being imparted to me. But yes, that's true. And also there have been times as I garden now and also look at the sky that I have questions that I wish that I could ask. But I remember her trying to fill me in. In any case, I miss her, and as I want to say again, you guys brought her to mind very well, and we'll all miss her.
Hi, everyone. I am Sarah from the library. And it was my absolute honor to start poetry every week on Zoom for Rosemary. and see her show up, sometimes with Margaret, helping her to say, well, dear, how are you today? And what have you been up to? And how's your foot? Because she remembered everything. She would always ask questions. And she always made me feel so incredibly seen. She had such a long history with the library. She was a trustee. Her plant sales, oh my gosh, no one could hold court like Rosemary. I knew who she was before I ever worked there. But it was a pleasure and an honor to get to spend that time with her and to get to send emails back and forth with her. We would have poetry on the first and the third Thursday of each month. And if there was a fifth Thursday, I'd reach out and say, would you like to have another? And she would say, yes, let's do it. So I know all of you, her children and her grandchildren, from stories. But it has been such a pleasure, and she was such a gift to all of us at the library. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for Rosemary. Thank you for being such a supporter, and thank you for making me always feel like there was nothing I couldn't do. I appreciate her, and I will miss her very, very much. Her last poetry session was on August 7th. She had been ill for a while, and we got the Zoom to start. And as soon as she came on screen, everyone started to applaud. And the look on her face is something I will always hold dear in my heart. So thank you so much. And I'm so sorry. And I'm so grateful that it was a gift to know her. Right, the house. Otherwise, farm at home.
The conference center.
Yeah. Yeah. And just a fine block. Yes.
Just use them all.
Good to see you, Mimi.
How you doing?